The sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Emily's alarm clock blared its insistent wake-up call. With a groan, she rolled over, her hand fumbling in the semi-darkness to silence the device. For a moment she lay there, eyes closed, savoring the last vestiges of sleep before reluctantly pushing herself up. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she padded to the bathroom, the chill of the morning air raising goosebumps on her arms. Before we continue, leave a comment below telling me where you're watching this video from. I'd love to know. As she stared at her reflection in the mirror, Emily couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. This wasn't where she had imagined herself at 25. The dreams she'd harbored of college and a career that would make a difference in the world seemed to mock her from some distant, unreachable place. Instead, here she was, getting ready for another day at McDonald's, where she'd worked for the past 3 years. She splashed cold water on her face, the shock jolting her fully awake. As she dried off, Emily gave herself a little pep talk, something she'd gotten into the habit of doing to keep her spirits up. "It's not forever," she murmured to her reflection. "You're saving up. You're working hard. Your time will come." With a deep breath, she set about getting ready for the day. Her uniform, freshly washed and ironed the night before, waited for her on the back of a chair. As she buttoned up her shirt, Emily's thoughts drifted to her parents. They had always encouraged her to dream big, to reach for the stars. What would they think if they could see her now? The familiar ache of loss welled up in her chest, but she pushed it down. There was no time for that now. A quick breakfast of toast and coffee, and Emily was out the door, locking up the small apartment she called home. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the promise of spring, though winter's chill still lingered. As she walked the familiar route to work, Emily allowed herself to daydream, imagining a different life where she was heading to a job she loved, one that challenged her and made her feel alive. The golden arches of McDonald's loomed ahead, and Emily's daydreams dissolved like mist in the morning sun. She squared her shoulders, painted on a smile, and pushed through the employee entrance. The familiar smell of frying oil and coffee enveloped her as she clocked in, exchanging quick greetings with her coworkers. "Morning, Emily," chirped Samantha, a bubbly teenager who worked part-time after school. "Ready for another exciting day in fast food paradise?" Emily chuckled, appreciating Samantha's ability to find humor in their shared situation. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, tying on her apron. "Let's hope it's a smooth one." But as Emily took her place behind the counter, she couldn't shake the feeling that today would be different somehow. There was an energy in the air, a tension she couldn't quite put her finger on. Little did she know that this ordinary Tuesday was about to become the most extraordinary day of her life. The morning rush hit like a tidal wave, a seemingly endless stream of customers filing through the doors. Emily moved with practiced efficiency, taking orders, handling money, and ensuring each customer was served with a smile, no matter how harried she felt inside. It was a juggling act she had perfected over the years, one that required concentration and a level of multitasking that would impress even the most seasoned executive. As the clock ticked towards noon, the rush began to taper off. Emily was just beginning to catch her breath when she noticed him, an elderly man shuffling towards the counter. There was something about him that caught her attention. Perhaps it was the slight tremor in his hands, or the way his eyes, clouded with age, seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. "Good morning, sir," Emily greeted him warmly. "What can I get for you today?" The old man squinted at the menu board, his brow furrowing in concentration. "I'll have a small coffee and an Egg McMuffin, please," he said, his voice quavering slightly. Emily nodded, quickly inputting his order. "That'll be $5.27, sir." The man's face fell as he began to dig through his pockets. Emily watched as he pulled out a handful of coins, counting them carefully. Her heart sank as she realized he was coming up short. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, clearly embarrassed. "I thought I had enough. I'll just take the coffee." In that moment, something stirred within Emily. She saw in this man's face a reflection of her own grandfather, who had passed away years ago. She remembered how he would sometimes forget things, how vulnerable he had seemed towards the end. Without hesitation, Emily made a decision that would change the course of her life. Don't worry about it, sir, she said softly, reaching into her own pocket for her wallet. I've got this. The old man's eyes widened in surprise. Oh, no, I couldn't possibly. Please, Emily insisted gently. It would be my pleasure. As she handed over her own money to cover his meal, Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't much, just a simple act of kindness, but the gratitude that shone in the old man's eyes made it feel monumental. Thank you, young lady, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You remind me of my Sarah. She always had a kind heart, just like you. Emily smiled, touched by the comparison. It's my pleasure, sir. Please enjoy your meal. As the old man led the way to a nearby table, Emily felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond any she'd experienced in her job before. She had made a difference, however small, in someone's day. It was a reminder of why she had always wanted to help people, to make the world a little bit better. However, her moment of quiet joy was short-lived. A sharp voice cut through the air, causing Emily to stiffen. Emily, my office, now. She turned to see her manager, Mr. Thompson, standing in the doorway to the back office, his face a mask of stern disapproval. With a sinking feeling in her stomach, Emily realized he must have witnessed her interaction with the elderly customer. As she followed Mr. Thompson into his office, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of injustice. She had done nothing wrong. In fact, she had gone above and beyond to help a customer in need. Surely that was something to be commended, not punished. The door closed behind them with a soft click that seemed to Emily as final as the closing of a jail cell. Mr. Thompson settled himself behind his desk, his face impassive as he regarded her. Emily, he began, his voice cold and businesslike, would you care to explain what just happened out there? Emily took a deep breath, standing tall despite the nervousness fluttering in her stomach. Sir, I saw a customer in need and I helped him. He was short on money for his meal, so I covered the difference myself. I didn't think— That's right, you didn't think, Mr. Thompson cut her off. We have policies in place for a reason, Emily. You can't just give away free food. But I didn't give away free food, Emily protested, her voice rising slightly in frustration. I paid for it myself. How is that against company policy? Mr. Thompson's eyes narrowed. It sets a dangerous precedent. What if every employee started doing this? We'd have chaos. People would start expecting handouts. No, I'm afraid this can't be overlooked. Emily felt a chill run down her spine at his words. Surely he wasn't suggesting. I'm sorry, Emily, but I'm going to have to let you go. The words hit her like a physical blow. Emily staggered back a step, her mind reeling. You're firing me? For helping someone? Mr. Thompson's face remained impassive as he slid a piece of paper across the desk. Here's your termination notice. Please clean out your locker and leave the premises immediately. Emily stared at the paper, unable to comprehend what was happening. 3 years of loyal service, of early mornings and late nights, of dealing with difficult customers and always maintaining a smile. All of it wiped away in an instant because of one act of kindness. This isn't right, she whispered, more to herself than to Mr. Thompson. Rules are rules, Emily, he replied, his tone final. I suggest you leave now before this becomes any more unpleasant. In a daze, Emily left the office. She could feel the eyes of her co-workers on her as she made her way to the locker room, but she couldn't bring herself to meet their gazes. As she gathered her few personal belongings, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She was unemployed. The job she had relied on, the steady income that had been her life, was gone. And for what? For showing compassion to someone in need? As Emily walked out of the McDonald's for the last time, she felt a maelstrom of emotions swirling within her, anger at the injustice of it all, fear for her uncertain future, but beneath it all, a small spark of defiance. She had done the right thing, no matter what Mr. Thompson said, and somehow, some way, she would find a way to move forward. Little did Emily know that her act of kindness and the unjust consequences she faced had not gone unnoticed. As she stepped out into the afternoon sun, the wheels of fate were already turning, setting in motion a chain of events that would transform her life in ways she could never have imagined. As Emily trudged home, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts. The weight of her sudden unemployment pressed down on her shoulders, making each step feel like a monumental effort. The streets she had walked countless times before now seemed alien and hostile, as if the very pavement beneath her feet was conspiring against her. She replayed the events of the morning over and over in her head, trying to make sense of how a simple act of kindness could have such devastating consequences. The grateful smile of the elderly man, the warmth she had felt in her heart, the shocking coldness in Mr. Thompson's eyes as he fired her. It all swirled together in a confusing jumble. As she turned the corner onto her street, Emily caught sight of Mrs. Abernathy, her elderly neighbor, struggling with a heavy bag of groceries. For a moment, Emily hesitated. After what had just happened, should she risk getting involved? But the thought vanished as quickly as it had come. No matter what, she wouldn't let fear change who she was. "Here, let me help you with that, Mrs. Abernathy," Emily called out, jogging over to take the bag. "Oh, Emily, dear, you're a lifesaver," Mrs. Abernathy sighed in relief. "These old bones aren't what they used to be. But shouldn't you be at work?" The question was like a knife to Emily's heart, but she managed a weak smile. I'm not working there anymore." "Mrs. Abernathy." The older woman's face creased with concern. "Oh, my dear, I'm so sorry to hear that. What happened?" As they walked slowly towards Mrs. Abernathy's house, Emily found herself pouring out the whole story. There was something cathartic about sharing her experience, about giving voice to the injustice she had faced. Mrs. Abernathy listened intently, her wrinkled face a canvas of emotions: shock, outrage, and finally, a fierce determination. "Well, I never!" she exclaimed as Emily finished her tale. "To think they'd fire such a kind-hearted young woman for helping someone in need. It's not right, I tell you. Not right at all." Emily felt a rush of gratitude for her neighbor's support. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. I don't know what I'm going to do now." Mrs. Abernathy patted Emily's hand comfortingly. "You'll figure it out, dear. Someone with a heart like yours always lands on their feet. And who knows? Maybe this is the universe's way of pushing you towards something better." As Emily bid farewell to Mrs. Abernathy and continued on to her own apartment, she couldn't shake her neighbor's words. Could this really be a blessing in disguise? It certainly didn't feel like it now, but Emily had always believed that everything happened for a reason. Maybe this was the push she needed to pursue her dreams, to find a job where her compassion would be valued rather than punished. Entering her small apartment, Emily was struck by how quiet and empty it felt. She had never minded living alone before, but now the silence seemed oppressive, amplifying the doubts and fears swirling in her mind. She sank onto her worn couch, finally allowing the tears she had been holding back to fall. They were tears of frustration, of fear, but also of a deep, burning anger at the injustice of it all. How could the world be so cruel as to punish kindness? As the afternoon wore on, Emily forced herself to be productive. She updated her resume, browsed job listings online, and made a budget to see how long her savings would last. But with each passing hour, the reality of her situation became more daunting. The job market was tough, and she had no idea how long it would take to find new employment. Just as despair was threatening to overwhelm her, Emily's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Samantha, her young coworker from McDonald's. "Emily, have you seen this? You're all over social media." Confused, Emily clicked on the link Samantha had sent. Her eyes widened as she saw a post that had been shared thousands of times. There was a photo of her, taken without her knowledge, showing her handing money to the elderly customer. The caption read, "This McDonald's employee was fired today for an act of kindness. She paid for an elderly man's meal out of her own pocket when he came up short. Her reward? Termination. Is this the world we want to live in?" Justice for Emily. Emily's hand flew to her mouth in shock. How had this happened? As she scrolled through the comments, she saw an outpouring of support from strangers all over the country. People were outraged on her behalf, sharing their own stories of workplace injustice and calling for a boycott of McDonald's. Her phone began to ring incessantly. Friends, former co-workers, even local news stations wanting to hear her story. Emily felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention, unsure of how to handle it all. As the evening wore on and the social media storm continued to grow, Emily found herself torn between hope and anxiety. On one hand, the support from strangers was heartening, a reminder that there were still good people in the world who valued kindness. On the other hand, the attention was overwhelming, and she worried about potential backlash or how this might affect her future job prospects. Just as she was considering turning off her phone and hiding under the covers, Emily received another message. This one was from a name she didn't recognize, Jacob Stern. Dear Emily, my name is Jacob Stern, and I'm a journalist with the local paper. I witnessed what happened at McDonald's today, and I was the one who shared your story. I hope you don't mind. Your act of kindness touched me deeply, and I believe the world needs to hear about it. Would you be willing to meet with me for an interview? I think your story could inspire a lot of people. Emily stared at the message for a long time, her heart racing. This was her chance to tell her side of the story, to potentially make a difference. But it also meant putting herself out there, opening herself up to public scrutiny. As she pondered her response, Emily couldn't help but think back to the elderly man she had helped. She wondered where he was now, if he had any idea of the chain of events he had set in motion. In that moment, Emily made a decision. If her story could inspire others to be kind, to stand up for what's right, then maybe losing her job wasn't in vain. With trembling fingers, she typed out her reply to Jacob. Yes, I'd be willing to meet with you. When and where? As she hit send, Emily felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time since leaving McDonald's, she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps Mrs. Abernathy was right. Maybe this was the universe pushing her towards something better, something bigger than she had ever imagined for herself. Little did Emily know that her decision to share her story would be the catalyst for a movement that would touch lives across the country and beyond. As she lay in bed that night, her mind racing with thoughts of what the next day might bring, she couldn't possibly fathom the magnitude of the change that was about to sweep through her life. The following morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the tumultuous emotions swirling within Emily. She had barely slept, her dreams filled with a strange mix of anxiety and excitement. As she got ready to meet Jacob Stern, the journalist who had shared her story, she found herself second-guessing her decision. Was she really ready to put herself in the spotlight like this? Emily chose her outfit carefully, settling on a simple blue blouse that brought out the color of her eyes and a pair of well-worn jeans. She wanted to look presentable, but not as if she was trying too hard. After all, she was just being herself, a regular person who had tried to do the right thing. The cafe where they had agreed to meet was bustling with the morning crowd when Emily arrived. She spotted Jacob immediately, a man in his early 30s with kind eyes and an inviting smile, notepad already open on the table in front of him. Emily? He stood to greet her, extending his hand. I'm Jacob. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me. Emily shook his hand, trying to quell the butterflies in her stomach. Thank you for sharing my story, she replied. I have to admit, I'm a little nervous about all this attention. Jacob's smile was reassuring. That's completely understandable. Let's just have a conversation, okay? Tell me your story in your own words, and we'll go from there. As Emily began to recount the events of the previous day, she found herself relaxing. Jacob was an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions that helped her articulate not just what had happened, but how it had made her feel. What made you decide to help that man? Jacob asked, his pen poised over his notepad. Emily paused, considering. It wasn't really a decision, she said slowly. It was just instinct, I guess. He reminded me of my grandfather, and I knew I had to help. It's what my parents always taught me, to be kind, to help others when you can. I never thought it would cost me my job. Jacob nodded, scribbling furiously. And how do you feel about McDonald's decision to fire you? Emily took a deep breath. This was the question she had been dreading, but she knew she had to be honest. I'm disappointed, she said finally. Not just for myself, but for what it says about our society. Should we really be punishing people for showing compassion? I understand rules are important, but surely there's room for humanity too. As the interview continued, Emily found herself opening up more and more. She shared her dreams of going back to school, of finding a career where she could make a real difference in people's lives. She talked about the challenges of living paycheck to paycheck, of trying to save for a better future while barely making ends meet. You know, she said thoughtfully, losing my job was scary, and I'm still not sure what I'm going to do next. But in a way, it's also freeing. Maybe this is the push I needed to chase my dreams, to find work that aligns with my values. Jacob's eyes lit up at this. That's a powerful perspective, Emily. I think a lot of people will be inspired by your resilience. As they wrapped up the interview, Jacob thanked Emily profusely. Your story is going to resonate with a lot of people, he said. I think you've started something important here. Emily left the cafe feeling lighter than she had in days. Sharing her story had been cathartic, helping her process her own feelings about what had happened. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to turn this setback into an opportunity for growth. Little did she know that across town, in a cozy retirement home, an elderly gentleman was about to read a social media post that would bring tears to his eyes and set in motion another extraordinary chain of events. Harold Jenkins sat in his favorite armchair, squinting at the tablet his granddaughter had given him for his 80th birthday. He was still getting the hang of this social media thing, but he enjoyed keeping up with what was happening in the world. As he scrolled through his feed, a familiar face caught his eye, causing him to sit up straighter in surprise. There, smiling warmly from his screen, was the kind young woman from McDonald's, the one who had paid for his meal when he had come up short. Harold's arthritic fingers trembled as he tapped on the post, his eyes widening as he read about what had happened to her. Fired for helping me, he muttered in disbelief. That's not right. Not right at all. Harold felt a wave of guilt wash over him. This young woman had lost her job because of him. He had to do something to make it right. But what could an old man like him do? As he pondered this, a memory surfaced, a conversation he'd had years ago with his late wife, Sarah. They had been discussing their will, deciding what to do with their modest savings. Sarah had suggested setting aside a portion for random acts of kindness, to help strangers in need even after they were gone. That's it, Harold exclaimed, startling his dozing cat. Sarah, my dear, you've done it again. With renewed energy, Harold picked up his phone and dialed his granddaughter's number. Jenny, it's Grandpa. I need your help with something important. Meanwhile, Emily was just settling in at home after her interview with Jacob when her phone buzzed with a notification. It was another message from an unknown number. Dear Emily, my name is Jenny Jenkins. My grandfather Harold was the man you helped at McDonald's yesterday. He saw your story online and wants to meet with you. Would you be willing to come to Sunnyside Retirement Home tomorrow at 2 p.m.? He has something important he wants to tell you. Emily stared at the message in disbelief. She had wondered about the elderly man, hoping he was okay, but she never expected to hear from him again. Without hesitation, she replied, agreeing to the meeting. The next day, Emily found herself standing outside Sunnyside Retirement Home, a bouquet of cheerful daisies in her hand. She had debated whether bringing flowers was appropriate, but ultimately decided it was a nice gesture. Jenny met her at the entrance, a warm smile on her face. Thank you so much for coming, she said, leading Emily through the sun-drenched corridors. Grandpa hasn't stopped talking about you since he saw the news. As they entered Harold's room, Emily's eyes immediately fell on the familiar face of the man she had helped. He looked smaller somehow, sitting in his armchair, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. It's you, he exclaimed, attempting to stand before Emily rushed forward to stop him. Please, don't get up, she said, handing him the flowers. It's wonderful to see you again, Mr. Jenkins. Harold, please, he insisted, gesturing for her to sit. Emily, I can't tell you how sorry I am about what happened. If I had known helping me would cost you your job. Emily shook her head firmly. Please don't apologize. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Helping you was the right thing to do, regardless of the consequences. Harold's eyes misted over at her words. You remind me so much of my Sarah, he said softly. She always believed in kindness above all else. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. That's why I asked you here today, Emily. I want to help you, the way you helped me. Emily started to protest, but Harold held up a hand to stop her. Please, hear me out. Years ago, Sarah and I set aside a portion of our savings for acts of kindness. We called it our kindness fund. We've helped a few people over the years, but I can't think of anyone more deserving than you. With trembling hands, Harold reached for an envelope on the side table and held it out to Emily. This is for you, he said. It's not a fortune, but it should be enough to help you get back on your feet. Maybe even start that education you were talking about in the interview. Emily's hand shook as she accepted the envelope, tears welling in her eyes. Mr. Jenkins, Harold, I don't know what to say. This is too much. Harold's smile was warm and determined. Nonsense. This is exactly what Sarah and I intended this money for. You're not just helping yourself with this, Emily. You're helping us fulfill our wish to spread kindness in the world. As Emily left Sunnyside that afternoon, her head spinning with the events of the past few days, she felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the unexpected gift, but for the reminder that kindness, no matter how small, has the power to create ripples that can change lives. Little did she know that her story was about to reach even further, touching the heart of someone with the power to create waves of change across the entire country. In the days following Emily's meeting with Harold, her story continued to gain traction. Jacob's article, published in the local paper and shared online, struck a chord with readers across the nation. People from all walks of life were moved by Emily's act of kindness and outraged by the consequences she had faced. Social media was abuzz with the hashtag #BeKindLikeEmily, as people shared their own stories of compassion and called for a re-evaluation of corporate policies that seemed to prioritize rules over humanity. The story had tapped into a deeper societal frustration, a feeling that somewhere along the way we had lost sight of what truly matters. Emily found herself at the center of a whirlwind of attention. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests from national news outlets. Her social media accounts were flooded with messages of support from strangers around the world. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, and more than a little terrifying. Through it all, Emily remained grounded. She used her newfound platform to speak about the importance of kindness, of standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. She shared her dreams of going back to school, of finding a career where she could make a real difference in people's lives. As Emily's story spread, it caught the attention of someone with the power to create real change. Samantha Rodriguez, the CEO of a major national restaurant chain, had been following the story with increasing interest. She saw in Emily not just a sympathetic figure, but a symbol of the values her company strived to embody. One evening, as Emily was preparing for yet another interview, her phone rang with an unknown number. Expecting another journalist, she answered with her now practiced greeting. The voice on the other end, however, was not what she expected. Hello, Emily. This is Samantha Rodriguez, CEO of Heartland Eats. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Emily nearly dropped her phone in surprise. Heartland Eats was one of the largest restaurant chains in the country, known for their commitment to ethical business practices and community involvement. No, not at all, she managed to reply. How can I help you, Ms. Rodriguez? Please call me Samantha, the CEO replied warmly. I've been following your story, Emily, and I have to say I'm incredibly impressed. The compassion and integrity you've shown is exactly what we value at Heartland Eats. I'd like to offer you a job. Emily's mind reeled. A job offer? From the CEO of a major company? I'm honored, she stammered, but I don't have any experience in corporate restaurants. Samantha's laugh was warm and reassuring. Experience can be gained, Emily. What can't be taught is the kind of character you've demonstrated. We'd like to create a new position for you, Director of Community Outreach and Employee Welfare. You'd be responsible for developing programs to support our employees and give back to the communities we serve. What do you say? As the reality of the offer sank in, Emily felt a surge of excitement. This wasn't just a job. It was an opportunity to make a real difference, to create positive change on a large scale. "I'd be honored to accept," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Wonderful," Samantha replied. "We'll set up a meeting to discuss the details. And Emily, thank you for reminding us all of the power of kindness. I have a feeling this is the start of something truly special." As Emily hung up the phone, she felt a sense of awe at how much her life had changed in just a few short days. From losing her job for a simple act of kindness to being offered a position where she could inspire kindness on a national scale, it was almost too much to comprehend. She thought back to that moment in McDonald's, to the simple decision to help an elderly man in need. She couldn't have imagined then where that one small act would lead. It was a powerful reminder that every action, no matter how small, has the potential to create ripples of change. As she sat down to share the news with her family and friends, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had been given an incredible opportunity, and she was determined to make the most of it. She would use her story, her platform, and her new position to spread kindness, to inspire others to stand up for what's right, and to create a world where compassion is valued above all else. Little did Emily know that her journey was far from over. The ripples of her kindness were about to become waves, touching lives and inspiring change in ways she could never have imagined. The world was watching, and Emily's story of kindness was just beginning to unfold. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Emily. As she prepared to start her new role at Heartland Eats, she found herself thrust into a world she had never imagined being a part of. There were meetings with HR representatives, conversations about relocation packages, and lengthy discussions about the vision for her new position. Through it all, Emily remained true to herself. In every meeting, every conversation, she emphasized the importance of kindness and compassion in the workplace. She spoke passionately about creating a culture where employees felt valued and supported, where doing the right thing was celebrated rather than punished. Her first day at Heartland Eats headquarters was both exciting and nerve-wracking. As she walked through the gleaming lobby, her new employee badge pinned proudly to her blazer, Emily couldn't help but feel a bit out of place. Just weeks ago, she had been flipping burgers and working the drive-thru. Now she was stepping into a corner office with her name on the door. Samantha Rodriguez was there to greet her, her warm smile immediately putting Emily at ease. "Welcome to the team, Emily," she said, guiding her into a large conference room. "We've got some people here who are very excited to meet you." To Emily's surprise, the room was filled with employees from all levels of the company, from other executives to restaurant workers who had flown in for the occasion. As Samantha introduced her, Emily saw genuine enthusiasm in their faces. "Emily's story reminded us all of why we do what we do," Samantha addressed the room. "It's not just about serving food. It's about serving our communities, about treating each other with kindness and respect. Emily is here to help us build on that foundation, to make Heartland Eats a beacon of compassion in the business world." As Emily stepped up to speak, she felt a moment of panic. What could she, a former fast food worker, possibly say to this room full of accomplished professionals? But then she remembered why she was there, not because of her business acumen, but because of her heart. "Thank you all for this incredible opportunity," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm here today because of a simple act of kindness, one that many of you perform every day without recognition. My goal is to create a culture where those acts are celebrated, where every employee feels empowered to do the right thing, even when it's difficult." She went on to outline her vision: employee support programs, community outreach initiatives, a company-wide commitment to ethical practices. As she spoke, she saw heads nodding, smiles spreading. These people weren't just listening, they were connecting with her message. Over the next few months, Emily threw herself into her new role with passion and dedication. She traveled to Heartland Eats locations across the country, listening to employees' stories, understanding their challenges, and working to implement changes that would improve their lives. She established a kindness fund similar to Harold's, but on a much larger scale. Employees could apply for assistance in times of need, or nominate colleagues or community members for help. She worked with the HR department to revise policies, ensuring that they encouraged rather than stifled compassion. One of her proudest achievements was the creation of the Emily's Law initiative. named not after her, but after the elderly Emily who had inspired Harold's Kindness Fund. It was a company-wide commitment to allowing employees to perform acts of kindness without fear of repercussion. The policy explicitly stated that employees were encouraged to help customers in need, even if it meant bending the rules slightly, as long as it was done with genuine compassion and didn't harm the company. The impact of Emily's work was felt far beyond the walls of Heartland Eats. Other companies began to take notice, reaching out to learn more about their initiatives. Emily found herself invited to speak at business conferences, sharing her story and the lessons she had learned about the power of kindness in the workplace. But even as her professional life flourished, Emily never forgot where she came from. She made it a point to visit Harold regularly, keeping him updated on how his act of generosity had sparked a movement. She also stayed in touch with her former co-workers from McDonald's, many of whom had found better opportunities inspired by her story. One crisp autumn day, about a year after she had started at Heartland Eats, Emily received news that brought her journey full circle. McDonald's, facing continued backlash and inspired by the positive press Heartland Eats had received, announced a complete overhaul of their employee policies. They were implementing their own version of Emily's Law, and they wanted Emily to consult on the rollout. As Emily stood in front of the McDonald's corporate board, in the same building where she had once been fired, she felt a profound sense of closure. She wasn't there as a disgraced former employee, but as a respected business leader, invited to share her expertise. "Thank you for having me here today," she began, her voice strong and confident. "A year ago, I never could have imagined standing in this room. But life has a funny way of coming full circle. Today, I'm not here to criticize or to gloat. I'm here because we all share a common goal: to create a business environment that values both profitability and humanity." As she outlined her recommendations, Emily could see the genuine interest in the board members' eyes. They weren't just listening out of obligation. They were engaged, asking thoughtful questions, and showing a real desire to change. After the meeting, as Emily was gathering her things to leave, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Mr. Thompson, her former manager, standing there with an uncomfortable look on his face. "Emily," he said, his voice hesitant, I owe you an apology. I was so caught up in following the rules that I lost sight of what really matters. Watching everything you've accomplished this past year, well, it's made me rethink a lot of things." Emily felt a rush of emotions: surprise, a twinge of old hurt, but ultimately, compassion. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," she said sincerely. "That means a lot to me. And you know what? In a way, I'm grateful for what happened. It led me to where I am now, doing work that I love and making a real difference." As she left the McDonald's headquarters that day, Emily felt as though a chapter of her life had finally closed. But more importantly, she felt excited for the chapters yet to come. Her journey had taught her that kindness wasn't just a nice ideal. It was a powerful force for change, capable of transforming lives, businesses, and maybe even the world. That evening, as Emily sat in her apartment reflecting on the day's events, she couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. From a struggling fast food worker to a respected business leader and advocate for kindness, it was a transformation she never could have imagined. But even more than her personal success, Emily was proud of the ripple effect her story had created. She thought about all the employees at Heartland Eats who now felt empowered to show compassion without fear. She thought about the other companies that were following suit, implementing their own versions of Emily's Law, and she thought about all the customers whose days were being brightened by small acts of kindness from the people serving them. As she pondered all of this, Emily's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Jacob, the journalist who had first shared her story. "Emily, I hope this isn't too forward, but I've been following your journey this past year, and I can't help but think there's a book in your story. Would you be interested in collaborating on a project? I think your message of kindness in the workplace could inspire people around the world." Emily's heart raced as she read the message. A book? The idea both thrilled and terrified her. But as she thought about it, she realized that this was an opportunity to spread her message even further, to touch even more lives. With a deep breath, she typed out her reply. I'd be honored, Jacob. Let's do it. As she hit send, Emily felt a sense of excitement for this new adventure. She had come so far, but in many ways, her journey was just beginning. There was still so much work to be done, so many lives to touch, so many ripples of kindness to set in motion. Emily glanced at the framed photo on her desk, a picture of her with Harold, taken on the day she had started her job at Heartland Eats. His kind, weathered face smiled back at her, a constant reminder of how a single act of kindness could change everything. "Thank you," she whispered to the photo, "for reminding me of what really matters." As she turned off her lamp and prepared for bed, Emily felt a deep sense of contentment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to spread kindness, and she was ready for all of it. Little did Emily know that her story was about to reach even further, touching hearts and changing lives in ways she could never have imagined. The book project with Jacob was just the beginning of a new chapter in her journey, a journey that would take her message of kindness to the global stage and inspire a worldwide movement. The process of writing the book with Jacob was an emotional journey for Emily. Reliving the events that had changed her life, from that fateful day at McDonald's to her current role as a champion for workplace kindness, brought back a flood of memories and feelings. As they worked, Emily and Jacob decided to expand the scope of the book beyond just her personal story. They interviewed employees from various industries who had been impacted by Emily's law and similar initiatives. They spoke to business leaders who had transformed their corporate cultures after hearing Emily's story. They even reached out to customers whose lives had been touched by unexpected acts of kindness from service workers. The book, titled The Kindness Ripple: How One Act Can Transform the World, was published 18 months after Emily and Jacob began their collaboration. Neither of them was prepared for the response it received. Within weeks of its release, the book shot to the top of bestseller lists. Emily found herself invited onto national talk shows, asked to give TED Talks, and requested as a speaker at international business conferences. Her message of kindness as a transformative force in the workplace resonated with people around the world. One particularly memorable moment came during a book signing event in New York City. As Emily was greeting fans and signing copies, an elderly woman approached the table, tears in her eyes. "Miss Emily," the woman said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I just wanted to thank you. My grandson works at a fast food restaurant, and last month he was able to help a homeless man get a warm meal because of the policy your story inspired. He said it was the most rewarding moment of his job. You're changing lives, dear." Emily felt her own eyes well up as she hugged the woman. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had embarked on this journey in the first place. As the book's popularity grew, so did the demand for concrete action. Business schools began incorporating Emily's story and the concept of compassionate leadership into their curricula. Governments started exploring how to incentivize companies that prioritized employee welfare and community outreach. Emily found herself at the forefront of a global movement, advocating for what she called compassionate capitalism, a business model that prioritized people alongside profits. She worked tirelessly, consulting with companies, speaking at events, and continuing to drive change at Heartland Eats. But even as her influence grew, Emily never lost sight of the personal connections that had started it all. She made sure to keep in regular contact with Harold, whose health was failing, but whose spirit remained as bright as ever. She continued to visit her old neighborhood, supporting local businesses and mentoring young people who reminded her of herself not so long ago. One day, about 3 years after the publication of her book, Emily received a call that would once again change the course of her life. It was from the office of the President of the United States. "Ms. Thompson," the voice on the other end said, "the President has been following your work with great interest. She would like to invite you to join a new task force on ethical business practices and community development. Your expertise and passion for creating positive change in the corporate world would be invaluable." Emily was stunned. From a fast food worker to a presidential advisor, it seemed impossible. But then she thought about all the impossible things that had happened since that day she helped Harold at McDonald's. She thought about all the lives that had been touched, all the policies that had been changed, all the kindness that had been spread. "It would be my honor," she replied, her voice filled with determination. As she hung up the phone, Emily's gaze fell on the framed photo of her and Harold that still sat on her desk. She smiled, thinking about how that one small act of kindness had set off a chain reaction that was now reaching the highest levels of government. "Look at that, Harold," she whispered to the photo. "We did it. We really did it." As Emily began to prepare for this new chapter in her journey, she felt a sense of awe at how far the ripples of kindness had spread. From a single act at a fast food restaurant to a movement that was changing businesses, communities, and now potentially national policy, it was almost too much to comprehend. But more than that, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was an opportunity to create change on an even larger scale, to weave kindness and compassion into the very fabric of how businesses operated across the nation. As she looked out her office window at the city below, Emily felt a swell of emotion. She thought about all the lives out there, the workers, the customers, the communities that could be touched by this work. She thought about the potential for a world where kindness and business success weren't seen as mutually exclusive, but as intrinsically linked. "This is just the beginning," she said to herself, her voice filled with quiet determination. "There's so much more work to do." And with that, Emily turned back to her desk, ready to continue spreading ripples of kindness across the world, one act at a time. The journey that had begun with a simple gesture of helping an elderly man had transformed not just her life, but countless others. And she knew, with unwavering certainty, that the best was yet to come. As Emily embarked on this new chapter of her life, she carried with her the lessons of her journey. That kindness has the power to transform lives, that one person can indeed make a difference, and that when we lead with compassion, incredible things are possible. The ripple that had started in a small McDonald's had become a wave, and that wave was now poised to reshape the very foundations of how business and kindness intersected in society. And at the heart of it all was Emily, once a simple fast food worker, now a beacon of hope and change for millions around the world. Her story was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it felt like it was just beginning. As Emily prepared for her first meeting with the Presidential Task Force, she couldn't help but smile at the thought of all the possibilities that lay ahead. The world was changing, one act of kindness at a time, and she was at the forefront of that change. "Here's to kindness," she whispered to herself, "and to all the lives it can touch." And with that, Emily stepped forward into the next chapter of her extraordinary journey, ready to continue spreading ripples of kindness across the world. Epilogue. The Legacy of Kindness. 10 years had passed since Emily's fateful day at McDonald's, and the world had changed in ways she could never have imagined. The ripple of kindness she had set in motion had grown into a tidal wave, reshaping the landscape of business and society. Emily, now in her mid-30s, stood at the podium in a grand ballroom, addressing a room full of world leaders, business executives, and changemakers. It was the inaugural World Kindness in Business Summit, an event that would have seemed impossible just a decade ago. 10 years ago, I was a fast food worker who lost her job for helping an elderly man, Emily began, her voice strong and passionate. Today, I stand before you as living proof that kindness is not just a feel-good concept, but a powerful force for change in our world. She went on to outline the transformations that had taken place over the past decade. Emily's Law had become a global standard, adopted by businesses in countries around the world. Companies that prioritized employee welfare and community outreach were thriving, proving that compassion and profitability could go hand in hand. The Presidential Task Force Emily had joined had led to groundbreaking legislation, creating incentives for ethical business practices and corporate social responsibility. Business schools now included courses on compassionate leadership as a core part of their curricula. But more than these systemic changes, Emily spoke of the countless individual lives that had been touched. She shared stories of employees who felt valued and empowered in their workplaces, of communities uplifted by corporate outreach programs, of customers whose lives were brightened by simple acts of kindness. "We've come so far," Emily said, her eyes shining with emotion. "But our journey is far from over. Every day we have the opportunity to choose kindness, to create ripples that can change lives." And when we do, we don't just change the world, we change ourselves. As she concluded her speech to thunderous applause, Emily felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought of Harold, who had passed away a few years earlier, but whose spirit lived on in every act of kindness inspired by their story. She thought of all the people who had believed in her along the way: Jacob, Samantha, her family, and countless others. Later that evening, as the summit wound down, Emily found a quiet moment to herself. She slipped away to a balcony overlooking the city, the lights twinkling like stars in the night sky. Each light, she mused, represented a life, a person with hopes, dreams, struggles, and the potential for kindness. As she stood there, reflecting on her journey, Emily felt a presence beside her. She turned to see a young woman barely out of her teens, looking at her with a mix of awe and nervousness. "Ms. Thompson," the young woman said hesitantly, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say thank you. I work at a small cafe, and last week I was able to help a homeless woman get a hot meal because of the policies your story inspired. It was the most meaningful moment of my job so far." Emily felt a lump form in her throat as she was transported back to that day in McDonald's. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she said warmly, placing a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "And thank you for choosing kindness. You never know how far those ripples will spread." As the young woman walked away, visibly moved, Emily turned back to the city lights. She thought about how that one small act in McDonald's had led to this moment, to a world where kindness was not just encouraged but expected in the business world. She thought about all the lives touched, all the ripples created, all the kindness spread. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that this was only the beginning. The legacy of kindness she had helped create would continue to grow, to spread, to transform lives long after she was gone. As she took one last look at the glittering city before heading back to the summit, Emily whispered a quiet promise to herself and to the world. The ripple continues. Always. And with that, Emily Thompson, once a simple fast food worker and now a global icon of compassion in business, stepped back into the ballroom, ready to continue her lifelong mission of spreading kindness, one ripple at a time. The end of this chapter was just the beginning of countless others. Stories of lives changed, businesses transformed, and a world made better through the simple yet profound power of kindness. Emily's journey had shown that from the smallest act of compassion, a movement could grow that had the power to change the world. And in boardrooms, classrooms, and corner cafes around the globe, that movement continued to grow, one act of kindness at a time.